everybody. I'm Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast. You remember yesterday when everything was real sad and it was a somber episode and we're sad about things? I remember it. But today's going to be completely different because we're going to talk about 1999 cinematic classic Mystery Men. Do you remember this show? It had Ben Stiller in it as a person whose superpower was that he got very angry. And it had, what's the guy's name? It's right there, William H. Macy. It was the shoveler. His power is that he shovels well. And it had Wes Studi. I'm not quite sure how you say it. He played Magua in The Last of the Mohicans. But he plays a character called the Sphinx in this movie. And the Sphinx is terribly mysterious. That's his power. He's a Mexican luchador wrestler type character, but he gives counsel and training to all of the other mystery men in a delightful training montage. But he always flips these sayings on his head. So these are some of his classics. He says to Mr. Furious at one point, "When you can balance a tack hammer on your head, you will head off your foes with a balanced attack." He also says, "He who questions training only trains himself at asking questions." And he also says, "To learn my teachings, I must first teach you how to learn." The whole movie is a treasure trove of this stuff. And I remember the first time we watched it, we came out of there making up all of our own Sphinx sayings forever. Likewise, in Matthew chapter 10, we're getting introduced to another theme, another thing that we're going to see repeated that's already been heavily hinted at. But here it's laid out structurally, this little turn of a phrase technique that's like the Sphinx by Jesus in such a way that you're not going to be able to miss it moving forward. He says stuff like this all the time. So we're going to pick it up in verse 37 where Jesus has just finished giving these three reassurances for why the disciples don't need to be afraid when they go on their big open world quest. And then he goes on to talk about the fact that this is going to bring friction. Don't be surprised by the friction. There's even going to be friction in your own households. And then what we're talking about today, verse 37, he says, "Anyone who loves his father or mother more than me is not worthy of me. Anyone who loves his son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me. And anyone who doesn't take his cross and follow me is not worthy of me. Whoever finds his life will lose it, and whoever loses his life for my sake will find it." See, it's the Sphinx thing again, because he flips it all around. Oh, like even if the Bible isn't something you spend a ton of time around, you can still think of a bunch of other sayings of Jesus, probably, at least vaguely, that follow this same pattern of if you want life, you lay down your life. In Matthew 16, after all the stuff where Peter is identifying Jesus, and then Peter has the weird clunky thing after all of that, and is like, Jesus, I'm never going to let you get hurt or get injured. It's weird and creepy and controlling. And then Jesus turns to him and is like, "What? Ugh, gross. Get behind me, Satan. You're a stumbling block to me. You don't have in mind the things of God, but the things of men." Then Jesus turns to his disciples and he says, "But if anyone would come after me, he must deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. For whoever wants to save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for me will find it. What good will it be for a man if he gains the whole world yet forfeits his soul? Or what can a man give in exchange for his soul?" So we got all this language again about changing currencies, thinking in terms of a different value, valuing even your most precious commodity, your most precious resource, that being your own life. This even prompts the person who's interested in being a kingdom citizen to rethink what they do with and how they value that precious commodity. And then I don't know why I didn't mark it, but you know the one. It's in Galatians. You've probably heard this one before. Go eat popcorn. This is Genius 2. I'm going to Galatians 2:20. You guys probably already know it. But it's this one right here. "I've been crucified with Christ, and I no longer live, but Christ lives in me. The life I live in the body, I live by faith in the Son of God, who loved me and gave himself for me. I don't set aside the grace of Christ, for if righteousness could be gained through the law, Christ died for nothing." It's a whole bunch of stuff that piggybacks off of Jesus' language in the Sermon on the Mount, particularly in Matthew chapter 5, about how your righteousness would have to surpass that of the Pharisees to gain access to the kingdom of God. And nobody's better than the Pharisees and the religious leaders. But there's this other path that is the righteousness of Christ, that is assuming a position of total dependence and need on this king. And that's exactly what Paul is referencing there in Galatians 2:20, and I went on to 21 as well, when he's saying, I'm crucified with Christ. Now, the crucifixion wasn't fully in view at this point in Matthew chapter 10 yet, but for Paul, he's writing after all this stuff went down. So it makes sense that a really appropriate verbal image for him to employ to describe the same stuff that we just looked at in Matthew 16, Jesus talking to Peter and the disciples, and in Matthew 10, Jesus talking about whoever finds his life will lose it, and whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. Paul is employing the most appropriate image for that. I am not just dead to myself and alive in Christ. I'm crucified with Christ, employing that provocative, vivid image of the crucifixion, and then going on to say, I no longer live, but Christ lives in me. That is Paul flowing perfectly and exactly out of Jesus' Sphinx-like teaching that if you want to be alive, you got to die. That if you want to be first, you got to be last. Remember when James and John and Jesus a little bit later on here are going by that Samaritan town, and they're like, hey, that seems like a nice town. We should go over there and tell them that Jesus is here and Jesus is great, and then everybody should sign up to follow Jesus, and they should make us some muffins or something. And then they're like, no, we're not really interested in any kind of Jesus thing right now. You just keep going on your way. And then James and John are like, you should burn them with fire, God fire, to teach them not to be jackwagons to Jesus. It's ridiculous. And Jesus is like, what's the matter with you people? And then immediately after that, you get them screwing up again and being like, so, since we're pretty much killing it on getting everything right and being really, really good at being your disciples, like, who do you think is probably going to get the better position of honor later? And then Jesus pounds again, another Sphinx-like saying, first shall be last, last shall be first. And the reason I'm harping on this so much is not just because I want you to keep an eye out for these kinds of turns of phrases so that academically we can be like, look at how well we know things about the Bible. We know a little thing. There's probably some even special fancy theologian term for that little kind of saying that Jesus said. I don't care about any of that. I want us to keep our eye out for it because it's the whole set of kingdom values in a nutshell. That whole upside down Sphinx-like reversal of the phrase is really effectively what the Beatitudes are, the beginning of the Kingdom Manifesto in Matthew chapter 5, in contrast to the whole world. The world is like this, but actually the things are like this. If you want to get the thing, it's actually like this other thing. All of the values of the kingdom are upside down and backwards from what the values of the world are. All of the currency of the kingdom is upside down and backwards. All of the things that have value in the world, they just ain't worth nothing in the kingdom. All of the things that have value in the kingdom usually don't trade real well in the world either. And so I fixated on this phrase because this phrase is not just a throwaway or a demonstration of Jesus' rhetorical cleverness on the fly. This phrase is one more place where the kingdom values are expressed in a nutshell. And it comes on the backside of saying, once again, like we talked about yesterday, this is going to hurt. And if it hurts to the point where you pick the easier thing, even a very noble, easier thing, like who would say that it's bad to love your dad or your mom or your son or your daughter? That's God ordained that you're supposed to love them. But Jesus again is talking about currencies. He's talking about the kingdom. He's talking about what has true and eternal value. And what he's saying is, you are going to get pushback from people you love deeply in God-ordained precious relationships. But if you love comfort in that relationship more than you love the truest, realist thing, then apparently you don't understand how true and how real the truest, realist thing is, that being the king and the kingdom, or you would pick it first and just endure the hurt and the hardship, though Jesus might be very compassionate toward that, though he might be very understanding toward that. Based on what he said about the kingdom, the most compassionate thing he could do would be to point people toward whatever is truest, whatever is realist, whatever is truly life-giving, even when contrasted with things that we would regard as of maximum value. And you might want to hold on to things about your life, things that seem right and good and noble, but that are challenged by your pursuit of living the life of the kingdom citizen. But it's not worth it, because whoever finds his life will lose it, and whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. I'm crucified with Christ. I no longer live. Some of you are listening to me say that, and you are like, right on, man, because I am a Christian, and I have been for a while now, and I believe this, and I am in, and it is very easy for me to be like, all in. This is the truest, realist thing. Others of you are in a place where you're like, I don't know, I'm just not sure enough about the whole God thing. I'm not telling anybody that I'm not sure about this, and that I'm in one of those up and down doubt phases, but this is the kind of stuff that freaks me out. Like, I know I'm not positive enough that there's even a deity to start being willing to make trade-offs like this. And honestly, I do feel that pressure from very important God-ordained relationships, and that is very difficult for me. I am empathetic to you, and I would say take heart and stay in the game and keep thinking about it, and you can only be where you are, but I also don't want to sugarcoat what Jesus is saying here. He is convinced that this is the truest, realest thing, and that just has to speak for itself. I know there are others of you here who are like, I'm not in at all, but this is really fascinating to listen to the degree of intensity of the call of the deity for whom your religion is named. And wow, dang, that's a tremendous commitment he seems to want from all of you who sign up for this. I, for one, would not be very interested in any kind of religion or claim to deity that was half-hearted. This is something that you do in the same way that you play tennis and watch shows on Netflix, and it's like just kind of part of your thing. No, that kind of a religion doesn't interest me at all. That doesn't seem like it has any of the answers for the grand questions of all of existence and humankind. And so I'm kind of freaked out. If you come at me with this level of intensity, I'm going to level with you here. But if a deity comes at me with any lesser level of intensity than this Sphinx-like saying, whoever finds his life will lose it, and whoever loses his life for my sake will find it, I'm kind of out and not interested anyway. Pretty intense, a lot to think about wherever you're at on this equation. No matter where you're at, thank you for being willing to think about it and for hanging out with me and processing stuff like this. I'm Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast. Let's do it again soon.